one of the very old programs on religion and peace building. It started in the 80s, looking at the intersection of religious belief, religious institutions, religious ideas and practices, and how they can contribute to peace building. And we have three areas that we work in, three pillars. That's on religious literacy, in terms of understanding how to engage with religious actors, institutions, beliefs, and ideas in the space of peace building. We work with policymakers to understand that, but also working with development workers and practitioners to understand better how to better engage in the space. We have action guides, online tools, and now we also have our program in Indigenous peace building to better understand this space. Our second pillar is on strategic religious engagement, and that is actually how to engage and actually doing programs engaging with religious leaders, religious actors, religious institutions on peace building in various parts around the world. And our third pillar is on innovative approaches to policy and also assessment frameworks. And that's where we bring it home to how do we take what we've learned through our programs and research on religious literacy and our work on the ground to the policy field and to making sure that we have assessments that can measure the impact of the work that we're doing. So I'm very happy to have Binalakshmi Nepram, who we are very lucky at USIP to have such a wonderful senior advisor who is so accomplished and has such wonderful networks and knowledge that she brings to this field of Indigenous peace building. And I will turn it over to her to lead the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Round of applause for Palwasha Jan, because she made the participation of Indigenous people probably for the first time at PART possible, at the this forum possible. So really thank you to your leadership and for everyone for your support. Jennifer is here, and Kushwan and everyone, Cole and everyone who made this possible. So thank you so much. Now, we are going to start with welcoming everyone, and then what you're seeing in front of you, we got together weavings from my home state, Manipur, to connect us. What I'm wearing is not made in China. It's woven by our women in Manipur to connect us. We live what we think and what we do in our lives, and indigeneity is about that connection with all of us, each other, and with Mother Earth. We also brought here, Vera will explain, from Siberia. You were all given a little a ribbon where you will tell your wishes only to yourself and your heart and your mind, and it's tied around a string which is made from the hair of the horse. Here you can see here. And in Siberia, in her Sakha culture, this is it will that your wish will come true. She will
Yeah, thank you very much. This is actually the rope represent invisible rope that we are connected to all to each other, and connections to our past and present and future. So we made it out from that horse hair because horse is a sacred animal, and it's we believe that this our creator son has that horse is a mediator between us people and our sun. So it's like, that, remember the horse with the wings? Our horses, they don't have wings, but they're able to fly to the sky. And when you have ribbons and think your wishes inside yourself and tie it here, unfortunately, we cannot use smoke, but at home, I will make some little ritual and make some fire with the smoke. And the smoke was, because of this hair, will go to the creator, and sun will hear you, and your wishes will come true, hopefully. All right. So, yeah, so please, when you have time, just smoke.
Yes, we will have that. We
Yeah,
will
not
have
right
that.
now, but later.
Yes.
Yeah.
So please hold on to your wishes, and then we will die. We just want to introduce today's session is on Indigenous peace building and Indigenous religious freedom as a pathway for building sustainable peace. We have less than an hour and a half. So in a short time to bring to you this sharing, we will, and for this we have three wonderful experts joining us. Vera, who just explained to you, she has a double doctorate in environmental science and then in biology. So she's a scientist at heart, but she also is connected with her indigeneity in her roots. She comes from Siberia in Russia, and then from the Sakha community. Okay, and we have Vera, whom some of you met this morning. Nidia Bustillos from Bolivia, and she is also a scholar by training, but she is also yes. Yes. And then we have, can we get Dr. Mariam on the screen? And Dr. Mariam Wallet Aboubakrine, she comes from Mali. She is also a medical doctor, and she is one of the leaders of the indigenous movement. I met her first time at the UN Permanent Forum on indigenous issues, and when she was a chair, and she is an inspiration to indigenous peoples worldwide. So these are our today's, you know, our resource persons and our sisters who will be sharing the work with us. So thank you so much, Dr. Mariam, and Nidia will just take us through an exercise and we will launch right into the session.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. To start, we are going to harmonize the space so that every one of us is going to be in peace. Please close your eyes, please, and just leave all the heaviness of your body in the chair and breathe and tell that your body has to be quiet. I want to remind you that the air that we are breathing now is the air that also our ancestors were breathing. When we breathe the air, we connect ourselves with the whole planet because the air is the same. It's the same air as when the planet was created. And when we are conscious of this and we are in silence, we connect with our true being. Thank you so much. You can open your eyes now and we can start. This is something that we do and the Aymara people do, and we call amuki. Amuki means silence. Sometimes we need to be in silence to get peace. You can continue.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Nidia. Please take a seat. We have arranged this room in a circle. Many indigenous cultures use this format to connect with one another, to share. Sometimes we pass what is called like a talking circle. Sometimes we, for example, the bamboo basket that you're seeing in front of us, made by our women, you pass it around, and whoever talks, we give complete respect to whoever is sharing their concerns, and in the spirit of collective sharing and listening. So thank you so much to everyone who have chosen to be in this room number 8 workshop, to be in this particular meeting on Indigenous peace building and Indigenous religious freedom as a pathway. And we pray that the universe recognizes and help us in what we are trying to achieve this, to bless all participants here, our home places, our concerns, and make it good for everyone again. We recognize that it is important that those who are gathered here take time to remember our loved ones that we have lost, to work towards healing and to do good for our people. We are here to create something more, a unified way of being with the world. This particular session, we are going to do the following. Based on the research that we have done at the USIP and some of the work that is being done by our partners, we're going to share a little bit of snippet in 5 minutes on what do we mean by Indigenous peace building and what do we mean by Indigenous religious freedom. Very short. This will be followed by our esteemed panelist, our sister, Dr. Mariam, will speak for 5 minutes, followed by Dr. Vera and Nidia. And then we will break out into group sessions based on 3 questions that we are going to. But before that, um, I know many of you have really established and known leaders and scholars and thinkers in your field, but allow us to take you a little journey. Where is the the clicker? Oh, here it is. Okay. Can we have the full screen? Yeah, the full screen of the PowerPoint. PowerPoint, yes. We have 107 current conflicts in the world, 117 million people displaced. So many of us, we have a lot of work to do. For some of you who are in this workshop on indigeneity for the first time, we are talking about an estimated 476 million indigenous people living across 90 countries and territories. Indigenous people speak an overwhelming majority of the world's 7,000 languages. They occupy 20% of the Earth's territory and represent 5,000 different cultures, faith, and way of life. So imagine when this is missing from our discourses and our efforts. Palwasha Jan has also shared at the plenary today that 80% of the world's conflicts happen in biodiversity hotspots where indigenous people live. This particular picture comes from my home state, Manipur. So, and many of the indigenous places are full of biodiversity. I saw this map, which was really interesting. If you look at global conflicts, which are in red, biodiversity hotspot, they sort of are overlapping. So I wanted us to know how critical it is that we work on peace building, on building relations, because if we destroy the last remaining parts of biodiversity, we destroy us as humans, civilization. Very short again, Indigenous peace building initiatives at United States Institute of Peace, we started this work precisely because we realized that how important it is to include indigenous people in peace building. We are calling, and many cultures have this for centuries. It's nothing that we are starting new. It's already there, but it has not been recognized as Andrea said this morning. If it's not in a journal or then it's not recognized as the knowledge which can be adapted. The protection of people, peace, and planet cannot be complete if indigenous people are left behind. That is why we are here today in this forum to be able to share with you, work with us to make this change. This year, so what we did was every year, I think many of you know, indigenous people convene in New York at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous People. We remember this time, and before the summit, before the UN meeting, we invited indigenous leaders to come to Washington, D.C. And for the first time, 120 indigenous leaders, 80 in person and 30 online, attended the first historic summit on indigenous people. What we did, we brought together, this was 50, but we had 120. We documented approaches, indigenous approaches to peace building. We identified innovative best practices. And then we launched a global network of indigenous peacemakers, negotiators, and mediators. And we work to ensure the inclusion of Indigenous people in all forms of peace talks, peace processes. Now, the next few slides will tell about some examples of what Indigenous peace building means. Have any one of you heard this, the Great Law of Peace? If you have heard it, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. So, the Haudenosaunee people, they live in the border of US and Canada. And they actually are a group of 5 nations. In the 12th century, they used to war with each other. They came together, and under a pine tree, they buried their weapons of war. They formed this conglomerate called the Haudenosaunee people, people of the Longhouse. And since that time, they haven't warred. This is called the Great Law of Peace. I also didn't know about it a few years ago. But again, some of this beautiful, knowledge is out there for the world. For our historic summit, we had people from the Haudenosaunee people who did the opening prayers at our summit, and it really moved all of us. The power of their presence, the power of their wisdom. So remember, when you go home from this forum, the great law of peace, it's out there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is what the great law of peace says. Roots have spread out from the tree of great peace, one to the north, one to the east, one to the south, and to the west. These are the great white roots, and their nature is peace and strength. In Rwanda, we know what happened in Rwanda. But now they have reconciliation villages. Rwanda now have 50% women in the parliament. It's an example to the world in which a country ravaged by war pulled itself up to be a difference. These reconciliation villages where Hutus and Tutsis now live together. We also looked at a Native American talking and peacemaking circles. For example, and they have got Indigenous Navajo court system in which if somebody does mistake, they don't lock you up in a prison. They give you back to the community, and the community work with the errant person to make that change and to reform themselves. So you see, what we are doing is a part of the reflective circle, or some call it talking circle, in which a sacred object is passed around and only the person holding the object can speak, requiring deep listening from others. In northeast of India, we have conflict resolution indigenous Dimasa village courts in which some of the border conflicts were resolved through indigenous methods. So this is what we are calling. And I know in your cultures, you will have many of them. Not everything has to come from Johan Galtung from Sweden to tell us what peacemaking is. Indigenous people have had it in cultures for a long time. In Ethiopia, we also have the Jarsumma indigenous conflict resolution technique, in which the Oromo customary laws, where it involves free discussion and other parts. So there we have in Africa, in Asia, in the Americas, and I know you have many more examples already in your mind. These are what we call indigenous peace building, which is out there, but it needs focus. What is interesting is I came across the wampum belt. Many peace treaties in indigenous cultures are not in papers. They are woven like in the wampum belt, where you're seeing the one on the right. So in our summit, we were able to share. They brought about many of these cultures of how they weave their peace building in weavings, in they are woven in these beads and others, just to share the indigenous techniques. So following the summit, we did build a community of practice. We formed this global network, and we drafted the first international declaration on indigenous peace building. And then at the UN, we submitted the memorandum to the UN Undersecretary General's office. And then, so some of the work, again, the small little work that we have done, we were able to take it to the UN with indigenous leaders. We also met with the UN chair of the UN Permanent Forum, and Dr. Mariam is here with Chief Whittle, little child from Canada, and Nidia was also there when we gave and when the UN passed its outcome document, several articles contain section from our resolution to show how a gathering like this, a resolution that we make, can make a difference. Yeah. And finally, on when we go back from Brazil, we'll be working on briefing the UN General Assembly on Indigenous peace building at Anga. So if you're in New York, please join us and we'll be happy to share the invite. So a little bit that was about Indigenous peace building. Now, on Indigenous religious freedom, again, we realize what is happening in that field. And we also realize there's something missing, that a lot of work has not been done. And we have our colleague, Knox. Knox, can you please? Yeah. So this is a Knox have worked on it. This 80% of the global population today experience religious conflict. This is from the USIP publication. This is again, and indigenous religions have been facing persecution around the world. But look at this: indigenous religion, if grouped together, would make up the 6th largest religion in the world. So there's a lot out there. But as indigenous communities face political marginalization, discrimination, lack of rights, eviction, and more, their spiritual and religious tradition become weakened. Where Vera comes from, if her indigenous people become more than 50,000, Russia doesn't recognize it as indigenous people. Currently in Bangladesh, where you heard the turmoil, in Bangladesh, they are not using the word indigenous anymore. They're using the same word China uses. It's called ethnic minorities. Yes. So again, there in many countries, they are not recognizing indigenous communities also. So imagine then their way of life. In Vietnam too, we have seen persecution in many parts of the world where indigenous religious tradition have been, kept under the radar. What is interesting is this is my grandfather. He's no more, but he was ostracized. He was exiled for 10 years for protecting our indigenous faith. So never in my life did I know that I would be here talking about this. And I remember him because he ensured that the exploitation of indigenous people do not happen. And it's more reinforced when I read about international religious freedom and all these issues and how important it is. And somebody said at a plenary yesterday that equal treatment of religious freedom means equal development too at the plenary. So I think we have seen. Now, indigenous religious spiritualism is very beautiful. This is image from my region, but again, it's about each of these. They are very much connected with native spirituality is not a discrete part of life, but is integrated as a whole, like many other religions, right? So it's very much connected with nature. Indigenous knowledge is embedded in a cosmology that reveres the oneness of life, considers nature as sacred, and acknowledges humanity as a part of it. So again, Vera and our esteemed speakers are here. They will bring it more forward, but the different forms of how indigenous religions are. Interestingly, in my culture, we also have what is called umanglai, which is our faith system in which it's a worship of the forest. It goes on for days. So our spirituality is very much tied to the environment, which also, and tomorrow there's going to be a session on faith and environment. And again, I realized how tied it is and how indigenous religious tradition can really help in preserving the planet and protecting the people. It's just an example. Again, our colleague Knox had written in his article at USIP in Latin America, where there has been, threats, and more so, as he wrote, religious minorities, indigenous religion, and indigenous communities suffer discrimination and attacks on members and sacred sites. The United States, religious freedom, they have also talked about, they've done research on African traditional indigenous religion, in which they have also been facing. So we are now starting to look at what is happening in around the world. Again, very new work. So if you have ideas and thoughts, please join us in this research and this awareness, because this is really new field of work. Also, the issue of desecration of sacred sites and objects is a very critical thing which has touched indigenous people's lives and land, because your sacred space, if it's violated, it hurts the soul. And hence, the last two slides, already there is provision out there. Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says everyone has a right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And I think the UN Special Rapporteur is here with us. I think I've seen her name. I don't know if she's here, but she was supposed to be here. But we have a special rapporteur on this freedom of religion or belief. And then the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Article 12 speaks about the need to protect this. So that's all. So with this, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Mariam Aboubakrine. And then what we will do after the presentation of our experts, we will be having a workshop where we will divide all of us into groups. One group will be called Peace, the Peace Group, which will look at how indigenous communities and knowledge system collaborate effectively for peace building. Examples of what's happening in Europe. The Freedom Group, what are the main challenges and opportunities in integrating indigenous people's perspective and their religious freedom for a sustainable development goal. And finally, the one on policy, what are the practical steps and recommendations for enhancing these collaborations at local, national, and global levels. So with this, I call upon Dr. Mariam to deliver her remarks. And yes, if you can get Dr. Mariam on the screen. Very faint, but they're working on it.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for having me, Talasem, and thanks for organizing and giving us this space at the first religious freedom for building peace at the Interfaith G20 Forum and at the International Conference on Religion and Sustainable Development session. So having indigenous peoples represented there is a very big hope for us, and also is it's a beginning for us, and it's also fueling us to continue the amazing work that my sister has just shared. So thank you. I also want to thank Nidia for the welcoming ceremony. It's really important to be in peace, right? To be able to feel, and for us, religion is related to peace of mind. So thank you so much. And I want to thank those who have chosen to join our event among numbers of events happening at the same time today there. I will give you in spirit I'm there, even if I'm joining from the Algonquin territory in Ottawa. So, as said by my sister Dina, Indigenous peoples live in the most preserved ecosystems, and we continue to struggle to live in harmony with Mother Earth. When I say struggle, the word struggle is really balanced, as most of the ongoing conflict in the world, she said 107. So most of them are happening on traditional land of indigenous peoples, leading to mass and forced displacement. What is happening to us, the indigenous peoples, to the land if we can no longer keep that balanced way of life? Loss of our identity, loss of meaning to stay alive, and that lead to self-harm, to vulnerability to be ruled by traffickers, but also by any kind of criminals that takes different names in different areas of the world. Sometimes we talk about terrorists, sometimes it's traffickers and smugglers. It can be anything, this spectrum. But also loss of biodiversity, climate events, and climate change. So having indigenous peoples away of their land can lead to all these different events and things. The triple crisis of planetary health, loss of biodiversity, and human health can't be solved without those who have been living in harmony with Mother Earth for millennia and who can understand the language of Mother Earth and who has been developing and transmitting from generation to generation the wisdom from Mother Earth. While the drivers of the planetary crisis are multiple, going from colonization to development at any price, we as indigenous peoples are heavily impacted. One of the impacts of the conflicts going on our territories, on our own territories, so we are heavily impacted by them. Some of those conflicts are reported, but some of them are unreported. They are hidden. They don't make the big page or the title page of journals. When you turn on your TV channel, you don't hear about them. They are not trendy. They are not sexy. So they are unreported, and there are some of the books and work that was done that has been showing some of the cases, but not enough as they deserve to be. That's why I really want to compliment the work and the space that is given to us today, because we, in a very small way, we are bringing them there. Some of the conflicts, as I said, are unreported, and one going on right now in my territory, the territory of my people, the land to which my people identify themselves, which is in northern Mali. Back in 2013, an approach of conflict resolution based on the international humanitarian law was initiated and has involved several states. The UN has adopted at that time, so 11 years ago, its resolution 2100 that has created the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA. Then under the auspice of what we call international community, that include member states and the UN system and other philanthropic organizations and so on. So they also has sponsored a peace talk that was concluded in 2015 by what we call the 2015 Peace Accord in Mali. Unfortunately, the leaders of the 2015 Peace Accord were mainly the belligerents in the conflict. One side, the state of Mali, and the other side, all the perpetrators. As of today, 2024, the UN has adopted another resolution, the resolution 2690, that has ended the mandate of MINUSMA, and all the signatories of the 2015 Peace Accord have also left the Peace Accord, bringing back after 11 years, almost 12 years, the situation at the zero or even a worse. But who were the victims? As I said earlier, Mother Earth and we the people, because we are the ones taking care also of Mother Earth by using, as I said earlier, all the wisdom that we got from her. If we want to achieve really the SDG 16 on peace, justice, and the strong institution in a sustainable way for indigenous peoples also, we then need to involve the more impacted ones in the peace building processes. Though, as said by Bina earlier, we need meaningful peace building that work for all, not only for the belligerent, for states or in states' interests. As we already said, what humanity gain by having peace in indigenous land, besides the fact that it's just a basic human right. Any peace building effort in global conflict must include us, and that's based on the Covenant of Geneva, the Human Rights Charter, the United Nations Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples, the ILO Convention 169, and other document and international instrument that's supporting those ones. Peacemaking efforts are currently usually negotiated behind curtain and at a very high level, spaces like the one in Mali I just gave. In peace agreement and transitional justice, there is no one size fits all. Peace processes need to be discussed, built, and illustrated from different perspectives, and built also from the wisdom of the people from whose land it's happening. And Vina also has just shared some of the examples from different indigenous peoples on how we build peace. So we have to use them, because before the colonization, that's how we indigenous peoples were able to stay in good relation with our neighbors. We never get a global war or conflicts that stay for long. I gave the example of the Malian one with the Tuareg people. The last episode is staying now for 12 years. Imagine there are 12-year-old kids who were born in refugees camp, and who can't imagine anything else than being in a refugees camp. So we want that to stop, and we want a true thinking around the peace building and a sustainable way to build peace. And for that, we need to take some of the examples that were given from indigenous peoples by Dino. There are more. And as way forward, we call upon the G20 member states, the UN system, including the UN mechanism for indigenous peoples, the UN peacekeeping operation, the Commission of Peace Building, the UCD, and the other academic institution to continue to have the topic of sustainable peace building for the indigenous peoples as a priority in their agenda, and to collaborate with the global network of indigenous peace builders, negotiators, and mediators that Dina has presented you through the picture, and that was launched at the 23rd session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples in April this year. To the UN General Assembly, we call on the General Assembly to proclaim by 2026 an international decade on indigenous peace building that will bring attention to the specific of how to build peace on our communities by us. Also to the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operation, to the UN Peacebuilding Commission, to the local, national, and to all the relevant stakeholders to include in a meaningful way indigenous peoples, women, and youth in all peace talks and negotiation, and to appoint indigenous peacekeepers, including indigenous women. Peacekeeping as indigenous peoples are the real peacekeepers of the world of global peacekeepers. We also call upon the UN Fund for Peace Building, the G20 state and philanthropic organization, to ensure adequate indigenous-led funding in support to the work of the global network of indigenous peace builders. We have plans. We just need means to implement those plans. We, the indigenous peoples, in a spirit of self-determination, commit to work with you to build the sustainable peace, justice, reconciliation, and healing that the world truly needs. Thank you, and Tanimert.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mariam Aboubakrine, for your excellent sharing. You mentioned very critical points of unreported conflicts. We'll be giving recommendations to the IF Interfaith Forum, which will go to the G20 in November. We will get some of the recommendations that you shared. The concept of planetary health is something which, again, indigenous people have used this language of planetary health, not only health of humans. So that's one aspect that will be taken in some of your recommendations. So if you can send us your recommendations by email, we can send it to Jennifer and those who are in charge after this. With this, I call upon Vera to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank um okay. Okay, now, okay, cool. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to share you with my real small own experience. I grew up in a rural area in Siberia, and for me, it was that our spirituality was a part of my life. I even didn't think that's like it's very special, right? So appreciation, nature, spirit of natures, like feeding spirits of fire, because you know like that fire is very important, plays very important role in our culture, in our life. We live in a cold land, right? and appreciation sun as our creator. So everything was so just like that. Yeah, it's me, kind of. It's our people. It's our life. And then when I grew up and started to get education and travel around, I and then start to meet other conventions, religions people, and talking about Jesus, about Allah, and realizing that it's actually very wisdom in these religions, because like many people, they find inner strange, like believing in God, believing in um, in Allah, and like that's different religions. However, when I met with indigenous people around the world and talk about that, I was so surprised that um, everybody, we share the same perspective that planet is alive, that the spirits of trees, plants, and animals can talk to people, that sun is our creator. And I think it's like oh wow! So if this belief around the world, and we share the same belief without learning like from somebody else, it means that it's not a mistake, right? It's a very, very deep truth in it, in this religion, in this indigenous beliefs. And then when I met with Bina and with other people, and just like start to think about that little political activism. It's not like a huge political activism, but like thinking about indigenous rights, it's like always involve you in some kind of activities, right? And I was like, found out that we have like indigenous people who have our peace building systems, right? We have our peace building methods. We have our peace build our belief, but why it's not recognized? Like in the world, why we're not inclusive? It's like so and why indigenous people and indigenous people spirituality are not fully integrated to the sustainable and inclusive sustainable development goals. So in this second theme that we have in this our workshop, I just tried to answer on this question. And I think that the main challenge in integrating indigenous people and indigenous people's belief system into sustainable and inclusive sustainable development goals is colonialism. Colonialism created all key challenges for indigenous people. First, it's a historical injustice and systemic discriminations, oppression, and marginalization. Second, because of colonial attitude, there is social exclusion and stigmatization of indigenous people. Third, there's economic marginalization of indigenous people, so many of them live in poverty and have high rates of unemployment. And poor people, they are less educated and they're less healthy because there's some limited access to education and to health care. Another challenge which grew from colonial attitude is a lack of recognition. As Sister Bina already told us, like for example, in Russia and other different countries, not all indigenous people are recognized as indigenous, because there's rights of if you recognize indigenous people as indigenous, it means you have to recognize their rights on self-determination of the natural resources, and of course, colonial countries, colonial states, they don't want it. And so this continues for so many years, like hundreds of years. Indigenous people were not recognized as equal people with equal rights in many countries. The lack of legal recognition of indigenous peoples leads to conflicts over land use and resource extraction without proper consultation, consent from indigenous communities. Many indigenous communities depend from their ancestral lands to sustain their lives and for their cultural practices, because we are part of nature. We need this nature like for our use. However, environmental degradation due to industrial activities poses a significant threat to indigenous people. State authorities and private entities often criminalize indigenous land defenders. They put them in jail or even kill. There's insufficient political representation of Native people at national and international levels. You can see yourself. Without political representation, it is impossible to influence policies that directly affect indigenous people's lives. And because there's no recognition of indigenous people, of course, there's not recognition of our indigenous people's spiritual system. And this is very bad because, as you already know, that in many of individuals recognize it, that indigenous worldview, indigenous spirituality, it's not anthropocentric, it's not egocentric. Everywhere around the world, indigenous people see that nature and human beings have equal rights. The main core of our indigenous belief, of our indigenous worldview, is respectful negotiations and finding balance between people and nature, and people, and balance between past, present, and future. This is the main core and this main wisdom of any indigenous worldview, any indigenous spirituality. However, this wisdom was ignored for so many years, and now we can see results of ignoring and suppression of our spirituality. For example, as many panelists yesterday recognized that our world is standing on the edge of surviving. Dysfunction of world governments and prominent world religions in protecting people from military conflicts, from hunger and poverty is visible. Environmental degradation and climate change, and finally, as we see these days, the violence in the name of religion is rising around the world. There are questions. Why does world crises like military conflicts happen despite all the history of international efforts to keep peace? Despite all efforts to fight hunger and poverty? And how to overcome this crisis? I have an answer. It is because modern world is still based on colonial system. It's just colonial system, that's it. And as we know that colonial is very egocentric, has very egocentric attitude. And that colonial attitude leads to suppression of indigenous peoples, poverty and hunger. It leads to environmental degradation, climate change, and military conflicts. To overcome this world crisis, we have to consider and turn to our all humans' ancestral ancient roots and remember that we breathe one air. To indigenous people, worldview and spirituality where the main value and ethic is finding a balance by negotiations between nature and people, between people, and between past, present, and future. So our recommendation is to support decolonization process all around the world. Government need to recognize indigenous peoples, indigenous rights, and indigenous spirituality. And indigenous peoples must be empowered by including us into the interface dialogue to policy the decision process and to the global economy. Thank you.
Now, thank you very much. My name is Nidia Bustillos. I am a Quechua woman from Cochabamba, Bolivia. And yeah, I belong to the team. And we have prepared some levels. Mariam, the global level, Vera, the challenges. And now I'm going to talk about the practical steps that we can do at global, local, national, and local levels. And Vera was talking about colonization processes, and I want to talk something about what happens with some indigenous peoples in Bolivia. They have changed their last names because they were not accepted many years ago because of the color of their skin, because of their last names. They were too indigenous. We needed to be white. And this happens. Yeah, I am 60, no, 59, but 20 years ago, this happened in Bolivia. It is incredible. But now, talking about this, I want to remind the word of Mahatma Gandhi. And he said, we must be the change we wish to see in the world. We have to take the responsibility for our lives, not only the communities, but our life. This is the only chance that we have. And it is said also, when we think globally, we have to act locally. Of course, it is very important to have this harmonization between the several levels. We cannot work only at global level and not act at local level, or see only the local level and do not accept that the work at global level is also important. And that is why we say, and now we have to understand that in this globalized world and society, throughout the internet, for instance, we are seeing that the interdependence existed, but now we are seeing that this interdependence is showing us that we can be also manipulated. And in this network society, let's say, is trying to make that we think only one thought. And we need to recognize that we have also diversity. And the diversity is our richdom. It is a world heritage. And at the peace building processes at national level should be also be encouraged, because many international indigenous leaders have fought a lot to be respected, to get, for instance, the Declaration on the Indigenous people's rights. We have also the ILO convention, the 169 convention of ILO. Then we have the CEDAW. Then we have also many other conventions, treaties that are part of our history. And these processes and these victories, let's say, were not easy to get. And also we can say that the donor agencies could have flexible funds for indigenous communities, so that these funds can support the self-determination. And considering also that all these processes have to take into account emergencies. And the emergencies are located in indigenous places. You cannot imagine, we were talking this morning and I said, we are meeting now here, but 1,000 kilometers from here, the Amazon is burning. And many plants and animals are dying. Also in Bolivia, the Amazon is burning because the agribusiness needs to get more space. And who cares on that? It is incredible what is happening. And also we have to create the infrastructure for and institutions and we need to have also disaggregated data in terms of gender and also ethnicity. And then we need to include also some, let's say, some there are really interesting projects and strategies that are developed by groups of indigenous peoples, women and youth at rural and urban spaces. And if we have the mapping of these experiences, it will be really interesting for us to get more educational actions that allow peaceful ways of living. And this has to do also with experiences related to trauma healing, psychological and mental support, strengthening the sports, dances, and all these activities that indigenous peoples have. And also it is really important to take into account the combination of work within academy and activism, let's say, because we can see in this way peace building in the whole dimension. And recognizing that the indigenous peoples' knowledge is a solid basis for recognizing the diversity and also ensuring the condition for living with dignity as human beings and being in balance. Because if we are not in balance, we cannot build a common good. And I should say that indigenous ancestral knowledge is part of the heritage of the humanity. And this knowledge contributes to the spirit of peace. And that is what we want to have. And I will finish saying that there are many steps and we are not going to invent the wheel, but we need to have the instruments and to have the mapping of all this work that is already done. And if we not include the voices of indigenous peoples, we are not going to get peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really important points raised by all our panelists. And one of the things that has also been initiated by indigenous people is the whole issue of environmental violence. It's actually a term now recognized at the UN. The violence done on environment, not just on human bodies. So all of these are now spearheaded by indigenous, elders, youth, women, leaders, midwives, from a very practical level. How our food is being poisoned, right? Our rivers, the food contamination, food. For instance, in my home state, Manipur, women's fertility rate decreased. And the reason is because of the pesticides in our agriculture. And so we are mapping all these aspects of how many indigenous territories are becoming sites for nuclear tests. That Mongolia had about 400 nuclear tests. And I met the diplomat of Mongolia who ensured at the UN that Mongolia is now a nuclear-free zone, nuclear testing-free zone, after the effort made by the people of Mongolia. Again, small little steps that people and communities on the ground, indigenous and non-indigenous, working together to safeguard and protect that we are working for human need and not for human greed, which is now destroying, our lives and our environment and this one planet that we all share. With this, let us break up into, and I love, I think the first meeting of PART we did, everybody broke up and we said hello to each other. So three groups. The first group, so here we go. Sorry, a lot of, all right, almost there. Yeah, okay. So here, who wants to be in the peace group? So we will divide this into three. Oh, here. Oh, okay. The peace group, please congregate this side. Yeah. Next to, yeah. Oh, here. The peace group here. Who needs freedom? Who needs freedom? Yeah, the freedom group here. Please join the freedom group here. And the wise ones are in the policy group. Now the questions I'm sorry, I don't have charts. But if one of you could be the note taker and the rapporteur. Yes. Yes, please. Yes. So the first group, peace group, will talk about how indigenous communities and knowledge systems collaboratively effectively for peace building. Freedom group, what are the main challenges and opportunities in integrating indigenous people's perspective and indigenous religious freedom approaches for SDG? And the policy group, what are the practical steps and recommendations? And don't worry if you don't know the answers to all of this, at least we'll try. Okay. And if each of our experts could be with each of the groups, and Mariam is Dr. Mariam is yeah. So yeah. You were in the second group, right? Yeah. Freedom group. Okay, they're all running away from policy. Okay. Oh, policy. Oh, okay, okay. Yes, I will join that. Yes. Please join us. Yes. And is Mariam still online? Oh, yes. Yeah, yes. She can join the policy group. Yeah. Mm. Time is up. I know. All right. I know you would like to continue on, but because of linear time, not circular time, we have to sit. All right. All right. Yes. All right. All right. I hope at least you made friends with each other in the group. As we do that, can because this group was introducing themselves so long, they hardly had time to discuss. Yes, but this one was very active. So will the Freedom Group report? Who's the reporter? Who's going to report? All right. You. Yes, come up.
We are doing it together. Come.
Go back to their seats, or should we
All right. Take the floor.
turn around? Because I want to look at them.
What are we doing? We're just sharing. Hello, everybody. So we came from the Freedom Group. Oh, it's no longer up. We came from the Freedom Group. I think what was interesting in our group is that we initially started off with the question of it's quite interesting that we've been dialoguing a lot around interfaith and possibilities that interfaith can engage with, but a question was posed around where are the men in this context. And so our conversation started in that sphere. But simultaneously, we then took on also this idea that as much as we are naming and questioning where are the men in this context, we ourselves have the freedom to actually be able to name those questions in those large spaces and not fearfully name them here. And then it was interesting that we then had, I think it's Churchill that you quoted, Roosevelt, and yes,
that after the Second World War, Roosevelt introduced the idea of four freedoms, which are very, very integral. Just to remind you, the freedom of worship, freedom of free speech, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Now, we automatically realized that one cannot sustain without the other. And this is the basis of our whole system of working together. And of course, it was Faith who said, well, yes, we should do this together. As an example that young, old, intergenerational is so important that we all are able to tell our stories. So continue on your story.
I think adding on to that, it is in the strength of collaboration that we are able to actually address some of the concerns. But we also, I think, borrowing from what we heard from a panelist earlier on who had spoken about moral courage, I think us being able to speak truth to power, and I think freedom of speech was one of the things that we had made mention of. We actually said that being able to name the things that we are concerned about and not fearfully moving away from them. So if we're speaking about peace building within the Indigenous space, we need to name some of these concerns that are there and then be able to address them. Continue, my partner.
Yep. So this also means that we should be courageous. And part of being courageous is also based in our, what I always term spiritual resilience. And this is when we come to Indigenous wisdom. And I think the Indigenous wisdom that we all are sharing today is so vital, and why we meet in circles which are safe spaces. And I think if we would all learn really to, communicate in dialogue, truly in dialogue, then so many of these problems, because our last point was we have humanitas, we have organizations which offer charity, caritas, but ultimately humanitas, caritas to dignitas. When we start approaching and really, really approaching each other with dignity, then we can talk about true freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, partner.
Well done, well done. Really beautiful points. Here,
Do you feel comfortable? Or do you prefer?
I'll read from your.
can you please so that people can see?
Can I do it from here? Oh.
Let's hold this for you.
Yeah, we are the peace group. Our question was, how can indigenous community and knowledge systems collaborate effectively for peace building? As we discussed from different backgrounds and from different continents, we agreed that for peace to reign amongst the indigenous communities, they need to appreciate and preserve the wisdom they have. By preserving, I mean they should have programs and projects that makes it easy for them to transfer the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge systems from generation to generation. And we also said it is easier in a community when the community solve its problems in a way that it is acceptable in the community standards and norms. So I made an example that in Africa, we do not depend on courts. We have our own indigenous way of solving our problems. So we said this could be another way of peace building within the community, because we know people who go to courts are people who have money. Court system is very expensive. So if there's a problem in a community that the community wants to solve, the best way is to sit and follow indigenous systems of peace making and problem solving. And we also said the indigenous community is stronger when it preserves its own language. In our own language, we can pray. In our own language, we can sing, we can praise, we can dance. In that way, even if there were tensions within our communities, we know a type of a celebration in our own language brings everything to peace. And we also discussed the issue of embracing indigenous peace protocols. We talked of the rituals, that every community has its own rituals that takes it through any trouble, any challenge, any, we all have rituals that are used for effective peace building. This one we did not discuss, but I thought of it. Hey, where is where we started? The first one. Okay.
Which one? Which one? Which one? Which one? The old man's wisdom, indigenous communities to come together. Yes, and it was also discussed that within indigenous communities, it is always encouraged for communities to form the groups and encourage dialogues and talks. This is where the groups could have the positive stories. They can solve their problems together in a very peaceful and understanding way as a community. And what else?
Dance as a ritual.
That
Important ritual. This was the last point.
the
Dance as the United Nations.
Can I give it to you to explain it? But I think before we go, there's one that I thought of. I thought of our situation in Africa where land rights and determination by indigenous communities could assist in peace building. In Africa, you can't say you have the right when you don't have land. If you don't have land, it's like you are living in the air because everything comes from the land. If you don't have land, you don't have sacred space. Without rivers, caves, mountains, you are not able to worship, especially the indigenous spiritual people. Can I give you to explain the last one?
The brother was talking about one concrete example in Fiji. Yeah, a global. He's going to talk.
I'll just explain. When Fiji chaired the Framework Convention on Climate Change, they organized Talanoa dialogues, because in their culture, to get an agreement, you form a circle, you tell positive stories with each other, you build relationships through positive stories, and then you go and discuss the issue. So they organized dialogues among the diplomats of the convention to try to improve the convention process. And I was privileged to be one of the outside experts invited to take part in one of those dialogues. So I experienced personally. I've worked with the islands for many, many years, but it just shows how you can take a indigenous practice at the local or national level and put it in United Nations diplomacy and make a difference. And we sort of at the end, maybe because in so many places it is the dances, rituals that build that unity, we need United Nations dances where the diplomats can learn to dance together, learn to dance together and build a new relationship for the future.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Big round to this group. Well done. Good job. Good job done. All right. This group. Okay.
If there's something needed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. Next session starting. So, as we noted, I think we took this Fiji practice to heart because we were talking more, introducing ourselves here to get to know each other. But we talked about how policies are really important to implement laws. So, in order to have laws on the books, then you also need to have policies to implement them. But of course, implementation is the biggest key to get to implementation. We talked about how the Paris Agenda hasn't been implemented enough. But one example was given in India of the Forest Rights Act, which was very groundbreaking for protecting people who live in the forests and live off of the forests, and that's their way of life. And that was really important because otherwise they were going to be evicted from those forest lands. So that was an example of something that works in policy. The other conversation we had was that we need policies for sustainable action and that interfaith dialogue with Indigenous is really important. And so we need to have policies that ensure that when we do have dialogue and that religious is included, that Indigenous is included. And then there was an example of the Vatican that is doing outreach to Indigenous communities for dialogue and better understanding of Indigenous knowledge. And that's as far as we got. Thank you.
No, fala.
Okay.
Yeah.
He wants to say something and he asked that I translate for him. So
Quando se fala em local, regional e global, When you think about a place, a region, and then global,
Nós temos exemplo, que é a faixa tropical no globo, né? Então, tudo que acontece nessa faixa tropical são semelhantes.
there's the part of the world that's the tropics. And so all the parts of the world that are in the tropics, even if it's in one side of the world or the other side, are very similar.
Então, o problema que temos no Brasil, que se tem na África ou que se tem na Ásia, é o mesmo.
So that we can have the same problems in Brazil, in Africa, or in Asia, all around this part that is tropical.
As soluções também são as mesmas.
They might also have the same solutions.
Então, essa é uma forma de fazer tanto uma coisa local virar regional e depois global, criando políticas para isso.
So we can make policies that are first in our local communities, then our regional communities, and then they can go become global policies.
Uma coisa, só completando, né, que é importante em todas as partes do mundo, é a água. Então, também, aqui no Brasil, nós temos problemas com água, problema com mineração, né, contaminação de água, tem na Índia, né, tem na China, tem na Sibéria, tem em todas as partes. Então, temos que nos unir para poder resolver esse problema pela água.
So something that's important in every part of the world is water. I know he says that here in Brazil, there's a big problem with perhaps the contamination of water, and that's a problem in India. That's a problem in a lot of different places. And so we can come together in unity to solve these problems.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You want to say something?
I just want to add, through policy development, we have the Kaya elders, the Kaya tradition in Kenya. So it has been a fight for long, but nowadays, now we have incorporated them in the system, and they are under UNESCO heritage cultural, and we work with them through other religion, with other religions. So we have intra-religious dialogues. So now they are part of us, even though they are still facing challenges of conflicts, but they are recognized under the Constitution of Kenya and the other CSOs. So it's a journey that can be started and can be done. Yes.
The words of wisdom which has come from every group has truly enriched this discussion. So to each one of you for your contributions, thank you very much, Yam Nungai Jere in my indigenous language. Really grateful for all your contribution. And I know we are all, some of us meeting for the first time here. So if you'd like to leave your card for us to get in touch with you, that will be great. Because some of you we are just seeing here since the last an hour and a half. What happened? Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And so we have looked today into a little bit on what's happening with Indigenous peacebuilding methodology and Indigenous religious freedom. I know a lot of work needs to be done. There's some work out there, but we welcome you in this journey together. Please visit us when you are in DC at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Please be our guest and come and speak to us, write to us, even if you can't come, but join us in our Zoom calls. We have a global campus which works, or in the regional office where, for example, Andres is. Secondly, when you walked in, you all had ribbons. Those ribbons have a significance coming from Vera's land. And you blow your wishes. You don't have any wish? Oh, so please get and please tie the ribbon there as you leave. Again, please, we feel that it's just like a friendship we just started and ending very quickly. So we feel, oh my God, the session could go on, but it has to end because the next session has already started. So please leave your cards on the table and take our cards so that we will remain in touch and continue this important work together on Indigenous peace building and Indigenous religious freedom. Thank you. No, yes, thank you. You tell your wish. And then, yeah, and you don't have to. And then you tie it there. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't forget your bell.
There we go. That was. Oh, that was.